I'm in a 1961, 62, 250 GTE. It's a car I've known for over 20 years. I think I first heard about this car back in 2001. Anyway, it's gone through a couple owners, and I'm about to take it out for a drive. But today, I wanted to talk a little bit about shifting. It's something that everybody knows. I think that every red-blooded male says, yeah, sure, I know how to drive a stick. And generally they do. I mean, to get it in motion, to get it down the road, I could teach somebody how to drive a stick in like 15 minutes. But it's the subtlety and it's the things about the transmission that you should probably know, just so it makes you a better driver at driving an older transmission as opposed to a modern transmission, and also a Ferrari transmission for that matter. Ferrari transmissions are not the strongest, stoutest transmissions, but if you take care of them, they will last. I mean, there's still raced engine. They raced these cars in the 60s, so they certainly were capable of high horsepower and racing other manufacturers. But that doesn't mean that you can just slam them into gear. I'll start driving and then we'll have an idea of what's going on. So obviously, the usual basic stuff, which is you just want to give as little revs as possible to engage the car. I mean, that goes without question. There's no reason to rev the engine very high to get it to start moving. That's all the basic stuff. What I wanted to talk to you about is just little tricks to make it a little bit easier to drive. So first gear in, nice and easy engagement. And it's just a slight beat. You can hear second gear had just a little bit of grind, but because I waited a beat, it gave it a chance to catch up and engage. If I jammed it into second, it really would have ground. This transmission is still cold, so it's not the freshest transmission, so it does grind just a little bit in second gear. But if you drive it carefully, that little grind could last for years and not need an engine rebuild or a transmission rebuild. But if you manhandle that transmission, you're going to need a new synchronizer. So my feeling is you're also just preserving the mechanicals on the engine. I call it mechanical sympathy. You have to have a little bit of mechanical sympathy. I mean, good race car drivers aren't just fast, but they also know how to preserve the machinery. So some of these guys who race, they were successful not only because they were fast, but they also knew what the machine was capable of doing and of pushing it to the very edge, and when and how to back off. Because no engine, no car can just take everything you throw at it. You have to be conscious of it. And so part of driving you as an owner of one of these cars, you should also have an idea of what this car can handle and what it can't handle, because that'll make it last longer. For instance, if I'm slowing down and I want to get into a lower gear, right now I've got, let's say, 3,000 RPM. I know that if I go from fourth to third, that I'm going to be at 35 to 4,000 RPM. So what I'm doing is when I go into neutral, I give it a quick blip and I'm in there, and it was at almost 4,000 RPM. So that shift from fourth to third was a lot smoother than I just went and disengaged the clutch and jammed it into third. I gave that extra blip, and that gave it. I didn't have to hit the brakes because I'm not necessarily slowing down, but if I did need to hit the brakes, I would be putting my toe on the brake. And on this car, my technique has always been just to put my heel on the gas pedal. Everybody has different methods. Some people brake and then roll their foot, but it's just not something that I've ever gotten used to. I mean, certain pedals will do it. I think once you get a certain technique, it's the way that you do it, and that's how you end up heel and towing. There's no right way to do it. I mean, there's a technique that you have to have a certain blip and neutral and all that other stuff with a certain amount of revs, but how you get there with your footwork is up to each person. It's also different for each car. Like, some cars are set up really well for heel and tow, some cars are not. What's neat about Ferrari pedals is that they are adjustable, so you can actually adjust them so that they will allow you to heel and tow better. The brake pedal can come up or go down, and you can also change the height of the gas pedal so that heel and towing is a little bit better. So that's kind of neat about some of these cars. You know, it's like Porsches. Old Porsches are also adjustable. The pedal boxes are adjustable. Just to goes to show you that these cars were built specifically to do that. Now, when they come from the factory, oftentimes the brake pedal is really high because they've had people who mistook the gas for the brake, and you know, a lot of lawsuits happened in the 80s with Audi, and so now manufacturers tend to sell these cars with their brakes really high, and they're not really conducive to heel and towing. But I think that there's adjustments and pedals, and you can change things and do it yourself. But when they come from the factory, a lot of times they're not really designed for heel and tow, manual transmissions. As we have more and more cars that are being built with automatics and Formula One transmissions or dual clutch automatics and paddle shifters, they're getting away from the subtleties of a stick shift car. For me, it's just the skill that's kind of a nice skill to have. I just drove a Bronco that had the hill assist feature in it, where when the clutch is in, it puts the parking brake on automatically, so the car never slides back. In the old days, or you know, with any car that didn't have hill assist, you know, you had to basically quickly jump from the brake to the gas and the clutch, and it was a really you know, quick transition so that you wouldn't slide back into the guy behind you. But you know, that was the skill. You always had the parking brake. You could always reach down and pull the parking brake. But you know, if you had fancy footwork, you can do it without the hill assist. I just find that more and more technology is taking over, and if you get used to this old technology or the new technology, how are you going to drive these old cars anymore? They're going to be too difficult. So it's just interesting to see all this stuff kind of going away. Quickly in this car, even with that little beat in between gears, and you're not beating anything up. And then we can go into overdrive. Since we're on the topic of transmissions, I wanted to do this little extra piece just to show you a little bit about clutches. These are all old parts off of a vintage Ferrari, so they're a little rusty. They're not the freshest, but at least it shows you the parts of what's going on. Most of the main pieces about a clutch system on a car is you have the flywheel, you have the clutch disc, you have the pressure plate, and you have the throwout bearing. All cars basically have something to have to deal with those 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. So at least it gives you an idea of how to identify or what people are talking about when they talk about a flywheel, they're talking about a clutch disc, pressure plate, or a throwout bearing. So a basic idea of how this works is this is the flywheel. This is bolted to the back of the engine. So when the engine's spinning and running, this is always spinning at whatever speed the engine is spinning. So if the engine is idling, this piece is spinning at 1,000 or 800 RPM. So what happens is when you're bolted, this clutch is in the middle of all this. This piece is the pressure plate. So what happens is the pressure plate, let me get these locating pins in, sandwiches the clutch in the middle of all this. And as you tighten this thing down, you can see that the clutch isn't moving. If I loosen it, or if I just get it loose where it's not, the clutch is kind of free floating in there. But the second I get the pins in place, you know, it starts to clamp, because the backside of the pressure plate has what the pressure plate. This plate squishes down against the flywheel to transfer the flywheel through the clutch disc to this, which then goes to the rest of the car, because this spline in the center, that's the spline of the transmission. So when this thing is kind of free floating and it's not clamped in, this is spinning as fast as the transmission is, but not necessarily as fast as the engine. It's disconnected. So what happens is when you put this clutch back in and everything's bolted in place, okay, this whole assembly is rotating and spinning at engine speed, and the clutch is the one piece in the middle that's kind of can be free spinning. The way you disengage it, there is a throwout bearing that pushes against this, and if you can imagine, as it pushes against this, the springs inside go the other way. There are levers in there, and it releases the clutch. So it allows the center piece to just kind of free spin as you're pushing. So you're driving a car and you put your foot down on the clutch pedal. What you're basically doing is transferring your leg strength against this throwout bearing to push against the clutch. That's why when you have a high performance clutch and it's big heavy springs, the pedal pressure is really, really heavy, because you're trying to work against all this clamping force. Because the more the springs, the heavier the springs, the more clamping force. Because you gotta imagine, you're transferring all the horsepower and torque out of the engine through this assembly. So in order to keep it from slipping, you have to have some pretty heavy springs. So this is what they call the throwout bearing. And the throwout bearing is a special bearing where the pressure of it is on the face of it. So in other words, this center piece, no matter how hard you push on it, is going to allow this plate to spin. And I don't have the collar in it because the collar has a fork that allows you to push it in and out. That's on the car, or it's installed. So I can't really show that, but you just have to imagine that there's a lever that connected to through a linkage, that when you step on the clutch, it pushes against this. This outside piece is attached to here because it's just through the pressure of it. So it's spinning. So it allows pieces to be free spinning. So the reason why I went through all this process is because it was to talk about two things. One is the clutch and one is the throwout bearing. I try my best not to keep the foot in the clutch for not long periods of time. In other words, when I'm at a light, I don't like to put the clutch in and hold the clutch. It's not good for this bearing. You can hear this one. This one's been replaced because it's loose. It's got a little bit of play in it, and that's because it wears out. Now, to take this off, the only way to do it is to pull the transmission out. So to save this, and remember what I talked about mechanical sympathy, is try not to leave the throwout bearing. The throwout bearing is designed for a million clutch engagements and disengagements, yes, but the less you use it, the longer it'll last. So the thing is, when you're sitting at a light and it's more than, let's say, 30 seconds or 15 seconds, take the clutch out, put it in neutral, take the clutch out. There's no reason for you to have your foot down on the clutch and holding the clutch in place, with the gear, in first gear, ready to go the whole time while you're sitting in the light. Because what's happening is you're putting pressure on this bearing the whole time, and anytime you use a bearing, it's just mechanics. It's going to wear out. So that's a big thing on the throwout bearing, just to show you what it is that wears out and why. And the other thing is just clutch wear. I mean, the whole point of this is that this is really, there's not a lot of material here to wear out. So every time you slip the clutch and you're just like feeling the slip through your foot, this is what's wearing against the flywheel. So I hope this makes a little bit of sense about what pieces you have and what's involved in a clutch. So when you drive, you have a better idea of what's going on inside this, inside your transmission and how it all kind of goes together. And it'll help you understand, what wears out, what doesn't wear out, and how to be a little bit gentler to your mechanics. Okay, so some of the things I wanted to go over. When you go into first gear, sometimes you put the clutch in and you'll feel it like tight to go in. It won't go in really well. And that's because first gear synchronizers, some cars don't even have first gear. I know that this car has a first gear synchronizer, but a lot of times what'll happen is you'll be driving and it'll slow down from a traffic light, from let's say you're in third gear or fourth gear and you come down to a traffic light and you push the clutch in. What happens is that transmission internally, like I said before, that transmission internally is still spinning. You have put it in neutral, but internally that transmission is still spinning. And it takes a little bit of time for that to kind of slow down, just with the gear oil and everything else. But when you're at a light and you're trying to go into first gear is trying to get overcome that internal meshing of the spinning transmission, and then the fact that right now you're at 1,000 RPM and there's too big of a differential. So what you're feeling is that resistance of the synchronizer. So a little trick is, what I've done is, if it doesn't go into first, sometimes going into second, because second is I think sometimes it's a bigger synchronizer or whatever reason. I mean, I just know that in certain transmissions, if it has trouble going to first, go into second first. See, like for instance, right now I have go into second first and then go into first. So what'll happen is second will slow the transmission down. And I'm not talking about lifting the clutch. It just so happens to slow the transmission down. Then I can actually get it into first because you've slowed it down enough to get into second. Then you slow it down even further when you go into first. Another trick is sometimes you'll be spinning. Let me see if I can get the transmission to spin up here. All right, so now I've spun it up to 3,000 RPM. So internally it's shifting, but I'm trying to go into reverse. You feel that grind? What is that? Well, it's because when I spun up that transmission, even though it was a neutral, all that oil and kind of connectiveness of the gears is spinning. So going into reverse doesn't have a synchronizer. It's just this sprag gear or whatever they call it. If you can remind me, tell me what the name of it is, but it's an open gear. It doesn't have like a synchronizer. So when you spin that transmission up, it's trying to go into reverse, which is a very low gear. Now watch. I've already engaged it once. Transmission engine is spinning at around 900 RPM. I put the clutch in. It still spins, but you don't hear it as much. And now all of a sudden, reverse goes in super easy. Okay, well, why is that? Okay, well, because I've slowed the transmission down. That grrr means that the internals now are matched to the reverse. So, how do you get it into reverse? Well, a lot of times what will happen is you're driving along and you're parking and you want to go into reverse and it won't go into reverse. Sometimes you just need to you put the clutch in and it won't go into reverse. So release it in neutral and then try it again. You'll always hear, you see that transmission is always trying to go into reverse with a little bit of resistance because the transmission is still spinning faster than it likes to be. But if you have trouble getting a reverse, sometimes going into neutral and then going into reverse will help, as opposed to trying to, like, I've seen guys just, and hold on, stop, okay? Put it in neutral, release the clutch. Right now, when you release the clutch, everything in the transmission is now kind of slowing down to a normal state. It's slowing down to idle. Then you can basically pick any gear. See, second will want to go in, third, fourth, and reverse. Everything's kind of okay, but jamming it, trying to get it in. Now, I know you've got traffic behind you, you got a light that's changing, and you're trying to do this, but it's as simple as, like, perhaps going into second and then going to first, or going into neutral, releasing the clutch, and then going into reverse. Those two things, just thinking about it, try it. Each transmission is different. Some transmissions will do it, some transmissions won't, but mess around with it, and you'll find where the transmission is happiest. But jamming it is not the way to go. Sometimes it's the right technique. And this is kind of what's neat about these old cars. I'm going to shut this down so we can talk. What's neat about old cars is that they require you to pay attention. They require you to think about where you're going. They require you to listen and feel what mechanically it's doing. Just when I was showing you before with the shifting, it's like you can feel through the shifter whether or not you have a nice, easy engagement, and you can feel through the shifter when something's not happy and it grinds. And so it's telling you to slow down, or it's telling you slow down on the shifts, or I'm old and creaky and you're making me go too fast. it's kind of talking to you. And some people might say, well, that's not, that means it's an old piece of crap, and it's, but to me, I kind of feel like, again, it's just learning the subtleties of an old car and then responding to that. I mean, there's nothing more rewarding than when you get a downshift correct and you can blip the throttle and you can get the gear to work right, or get the engagement to work right. I mean, it's a little bit of, it's rewarding to do that. And so driving an old car is all about that. And so these are the little techniques that you can explore and try and experiment with the car, and become better at the relationship that you have with an old car. The other thing with it that happens is, like, when you drive an old car, especially a manual transmission, it forces you to think a little bit more about, even as you're approaching a hill and everybody's worried about, okay, am I going to be able to engage the clutch in time and not slide into the guy behind me? But the other thing, there's little subtle things that you can do. You can look at the way that the hill goes at the stoplight, and you could say, well, do I go all the way up to the end where it's all the way up, or does it crest a little bit, and do I go past the crest of the hill, so that way it's a little less abrupt on the clutch? If I live in San Francisco, there's nothing you could do. You're just going to have to learn how to do it well. But I'm sure there are hills that you can just crest it a little bit more, further past a certain point, where you can say, okay, I can. It's easier for me to slip the clutch there. That, to me, are little tricks that help makes driving these old cars a little easier. They're tips that I think we just don't think about when I'm doing it, because I've been doing it for so long. But if any of this stuff helps you, I hope it helps you when you drive your old car. If you have any tips that you'd like to share about driving an old car that I haven't mentioned, or you'd like to see me mention, please let me know in the comments below. I have to try to remember that a lot of this stuff, when you do this for so long, you don't realize that there are people who might not just know about these little things that actually someone showed me, and it was just like a mind-blowing or a revelation. Those things are things that you'll find on your car that has a specific thing about it, and you'll adapt your technique to doing that, and again, maybe have a better relationship with your old car. Thanks for watching.